Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. I'm Michael Hartley, 34, and until December 18th at 3:47 p.m., I thought I understood the difference between being legally smart and being emotionally stupid. That was the exact moment my wife, Sarah, left a voicemail that would unravel 8 years of marriage with 15 words. Christmas is off. Expect a call from my lawyer. We're done, Michael. Finally done. I was sitting in my corner office at Brennan & Associates, reviewing a commercial real estate contract for a client's $2.3 million acquisition, when my phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. We'd been avoiding each other for 3 weeks since our last blowout about the house payments, and I honestly wasn't ready for another round of accusations about my controlling behavior and financial manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on me that as a real estate attorney specializing in complex property transactions, I could navigate million-dollar deals in my sleep, but I couldn't seem to have a civil conversation with the woman I'd married about our own $320,000 mortgage. When I finally listened to the message an hour later, her voice had that particular edge I'd grown to recognize over the past 2 years. Not angry, not sad, just coldly resolved. Sarah had always been decisive when she reached her breaking point. I remember the first time I'd seen that quality in her, back in 2016 when we were just dating and she'd fired her wedding planner 6 months before our wedding because the woman kept ignoring her requests. Some people think indecision is kindness, she told me then, but really it's just cruelty with better PR. I found it attractive then, that clarity of purpose. Now it felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. I didn't argue. Didn't call back demanding explanations or begging for another chance to work things out. Instead, I texted back exactly what any reasonable attorney would text when served with an ultimatum: understood. Then I set my phone aside, finished reviewing the contract, and spent the next 3 hours researching something I'd never thought I'd need to know: the precise legal procedure for removing myself as a co-borrower from our joint mortgage in Maryland. What I didn't understand then was that those 3 hours of research would trigger a chain reaction that would expose exactly how much our marriage had been built on financial quicksand. By Thursday evening, I'd quietly executed a quitclaim deed, removing my name from both the mortgage and the property title, filed it with the county recorder's office, and notified our lender through their appropriate legal channels. It was a move that required exactly the kind of specialized knowledge I'd spent 12 years acquiring. First at Georgetown Law, then through 6 years of practice in real estate transactions. I knew precisely what I was doing, which legal boxes to check, and exactly what the consequences would be. What I couldn't have predicted was that by Saturday morning, I'd have 67 missed calls for increasingly frantic voicemails from Sarah and a call from her attorney, Patricia Valdez, that started with, "Mr. Hartley, we need to talk immediately," and ended with, "What exactly did you think would happen when you did this?" Looking back, I can see that the real story started 8 months earlier, in April, when Sarah's mother Helen moved in with us temporarily after her divorce was finalized. Helen Brennan, not related to my law firm, though the shared name had caused some amusing confusion, was a 58-year-old interior designer who'd spent 30 years married to a successful orthopedic surgeon and had very strong opinions about how money should be managed in a marriage. Specifically, she believed that husbands who controlled joint finances were exhibiting classic narcissistic behavior patterns, and that wives needed to protect themselves financially through separate accounts and independent credit lines. I should have seen the signs when Sarah started asking questions about our mortgage that she'd never cared about before. We bought the 4-bedroom colonial in Bethesda 3 years earlier, right after I'd made partner, and Sarah had been perfectly content to let me handle all the financial details. She trusted my expertise, she said, and besides, real estate law was boring as watching paint dry. But suddenly, with Helen's daily commentary about financial independence and women's rights echoing through our house, Sarah wanted to understand everything. The terms of our 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, the exact amount of our equity, the implications of our joint ownership structure. "Why is your name listed first on all the documents?" she asked one evening in May, spreading our mortgage paperwork across the kitchen table where Helen was preparing what she called her famous Mediterranean quinoa salad. I explained that the order of names on a mortgage is typically alphabetical or based on credit scores, that it had no legal significance regarding ownership rights. But Helen looked up from her quinoa with raised eyebrows and said, "In my experience, Michael, the person whose name comes first, is usually the person who thinks they're in charge." I tried to laugh it off, but Sarah wasn't laughing. She wanted to know why we'd structured our finances the way we had, with both our paychecks going into our joint checking account and all bills paid from there. It was efficient, I explained. I managed our investments and long-term financial planning, while she handled day-to-day expenses and had her own credit card for personal purchases. We'd never had problems with this system. In fact, Sarah had often expressed gratitude that she didn't have to worry about boring money stuff because I enjoyed managing it. But now, with Helen whispering in her ear about financial autonomy and independence, everything I'd done for 8 years suddenly looked sinister. When I suggested we meet with our financial advisor to review our portfolio and discuss any changes Sarah wanted to make, Helen declared that suggesting a meeting with his financial advisor was a classic manipulation tactic designed to maintain control. When I offered to add Sarah as a joint owner on my individual brokerage account that contained our retirement savings, Helen pointed out that I was only offering this after being cornered and that truly equitable partners would have set this up from the beginning. The breaking point came in November, during what Sarah later called the credit card incident. I was reviewing our monthly statements when I noticed an unusual pattern of charges on Sarah's card. $847 at Nordstrom, $623 at West Elm, $1,200 at Williams-Sonoma, all within a single week. This wasn't unusual in terms of amount. Sarah had always been a thoughtful shopper who invested in quality items for our home. But the timing was concerning because we'd just committed to saving an additional $2,000 per month for a down payment on a vacation property in Rehoboth Beach. I asked Sarah about the charges, not accusingly, just as a financial planning question about whether we needed to adjust our savings timeline. But Helen was there when I brought it up, and she immediately framed it as financial surveillance. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she told Sarah. "He's monitoring your spending like you're a child." When David did this to me, it was the beginning of 20 years of financial abuse. Financial abuse. That phrase hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I tried to explain that reviewing credit card statements was basic financial management, that couples who want to achieve savings goals need to coordinate their spending. But Helen had introduced a narrative where everything I did was evidence of controlling behavior, and Sarah was starting to see our entire financial relationship through that lens. The conversation escalated into our worst fight in 8 years of marriage. Sarah accused me of treating her like an employee in her own household. I pointed out that she'd never expressed any desire to manage our finances and had actively avoided financial responsibilities for our entire relationship. She countered that I created a system that made her dependent on me and then used that dependence to maintain control. We said things that night that we'd never said before, accusations that cut to the bone of who we thought we were as people. That's when I realized something that would haunt me for months afterward. Sarah wasn't wrong about the control dynamic, but she was wrong about my motivations. I had structured our finances in a way that gave me authority, but not because I wanted power over her. I'd done it because financial management was something I was good at, something I enjoyed, and something that seemed to stress her out. I thought I was being helpful. But Helen's presence had revealed how that helpfulness could look like domination to someone who decided to see it that way. What happened next would change everything about how I understood marriage, money, and the difference between legal rights and emotional truths. Sarah moved into our guest bedroom, ostensibly to give Helen the master suite since Helen was going through such a difficult transition. But really, it was because we couldn't stand to be in the same room anymore. For 3 weeks, we lived like polite strangers in our own house. Helen continued her daily commentary about financial independence and women's rights. Sarah started making mysterious phone calls behind closed doors. And I began to wonder if the marriage I'd thought was built on love and partnership had actually been built on convenience and habit. The moment everything changed was when I came home from work on December 17th and found Sarah and Helen in the kitchen with papers spread across the table. Not our financial documents this time, but what looked like legal forms. When I asked what they were working on, Sarah said they were exploring options for financial independence. Helen looked up with a satisfied smile and said, "Sometimes a woman has to protect herself, Michael." That night, I lay awake in our bed. Now, just my bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how we'd gotten here. 8 years ago, Sarah and I had been planning a future together. We talked about kids, about the house we'd buy, about growing old together on that porch in Rehoboth Beach. We'd built something I thought was solid, something I thought was based on mutual respect and shared values. But apparently, I'd been building alone while Sarah felt trapped in a structure she'd never really chosen. The irony wasn't lost on me that as someone who specialized in property law, I understood exactly how ownership worked in legal terms, but had completely missed how ownership felt in emotional terms. I could draft a partnership agreement that would protect two strangers buying commercial real estate together, but I'd failed to create a marriage where my own wife felt like an equal partner. That's when I made the decision that would force everything into the open. If Sarah wanted financial independence, if she wanted to separate our lives and protect herself from my supposed financial control, then she could have exactly what she was asking for. I would remove myself entirely from our shared financial obligations and let her discover what that independence actually meant. The next morning, December 18th, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and drove to the county courthouse. By noon, I had filed a quitclaim deed, transferring my ownership interest in our house entirely to Sarah. By 2 p.m., I had executed the paperwork to remove myself as a co-borrower from our $320,000 mortgage. By 4 p.m., I had notified our lender that I was no longer financially responsible for the loan, which meant that Sarah now bore sole legal responsibility for the monthly payments of $2,847. I did everything correctly, following every legal requirement and notification procedure. As someone who'd executed hundreds of similar transactions for clients, I knew exactly what I was doing and exactly what it would mean. What I didn't fully anticipate was the emotional tsunami that would follow. The first sign that Sarah didn't understand what had happened came Thursday evening when she tried to use our joint credit card and found that it had been declined. I'd closed all our joint accounts after removing myself from the mortgage. Not out of spite, but because maintaining joint financial obligations while legally separating property ownership creates liability issues that any competent attorney would avoid. When she called me at work, her voice was shaky. "Michael, something's wrong with our credit card." I explained what I'd done, calmly and factually, the way I'd explain a legal procedure to any client. I'd removed myself from our joint financial obligations, as she'd requested through her attorney consultation. She now had complete financial independence and autonomy over our shared assets. The house was entirely hers, which meant she could make any decisions about it without my input or interference. Wasn't this what she'd wanted? The silence on the phone lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Sarah said, "You can't just do that. You can't just abandon everything." But legally, I could do exactly that, and I had. The paperwork was filed, the notifications were sent, and the changes were already in effect. Friday morning brought the first panicked voicemail from Sarah. "Michael, I need you to call me back. Helen talked to her attorney friend, and she says what you did might not be legal. We need to fix this before anyone finds out." But there was nothing to fix. Everything I'd done was completely legal and properly executed. The problem wasn't the legality. It was that Sarah had never actually wanted the financial independence she'd been demanding. She'd wanted the feeling of independence without the responsibility that comes with it. By Friday afternoon, the reality was setting in. Sarah's salary as a social worker was $52,000 per year. Our mortgage payment was $2,847 per month, plus $400 for property taxes and insurance, plus utilities, maintenance, and all the other costs of homeownership. She could cover the housing costs for maybe 4 months using our joint savings account, which was now her savings account. But after that, she needed to either sell the house or find someone to help with the payments. The conversation that changed everything came Saturday morning when Patricia Valdez called me at 7:30 a.m. I'd never spoken to Sarah's attorney before, but her voice had the particular tension of someone who'd just realized her client had made a massive miscalculation. Mr. Hartley, she said, I need to understand your intentions regarding the property transfer you executed this week. I explained my intentions clearly. I'd removed myself from our shared financial obligations to give Sarah the independence she'd been seeking. There were no hidden motives or strategic games. If she wanted to be financially autonomous, she needed to actually be financially autonomous. But surely you understand that Mrs. Hartley can't afford the mortgage payments on her own, Patricia said. I'm sure she considered that before deciding to separate our finances, I replied. That's when Patricia's professional composure cracked slightly. Mr. Hartley, with respect, I think there may have been a misunderstanding about what Mrs. Hartley was seeking in terms of separation. The truth hit me like a sledgehammer. Sarah hadn't wanted actual financial independence. She'd wanted the power to threaten financial independence while still enjoying the security of my income and financial management. She'd wanted to be able to play the victim of financial control while never actually taking responsibility for financial decisions. It was a legal and emotional impossibility that I'd forced into reality by giving her exactly what she'd claimed to want. The 48 hours that followed were a masterclass in the difference between what people say they want and what they actually want. Sarah left 17 voicemails, each more desperate than the last. Helen apparently locked herself in the guest bedroom and refused to come out after her daughter explained that inheriting sole responsibility for a mortgage might not be the liberation she'd imagined. Patricia Valdez called 6 more times, trying to negotiate some kind of temporary arrangement while they figured out a long-term solution. But the most revealing call came Sunday morning from Sarah herself, her voice hoarse from crying. Michael, please. I know we've had problems, but you can't just destroy everything we built together. This house is our life, our future. You can't just walk away from that. I thought I was the one destroying our future by controlling our finances. I said, that's not what I meant, and you know it. Then what did you mean, Sarah? Because for 8 months, you and your mother have been telling me that I'm financially abusive and controlling. You've been consulting with attorneys about protecting yourself from me. You left a voicemail saying our marriage was over. What exactly did you think would happen when you forced me to choose between being a controlling husband or no husband at all? The silence that followed was filled with the weight of everything we'd never said to each other, all the assumptions we'd made about what the other person wanted and needed. Finally, Sarah said, I just wanted you to see me as an equal partner. So did I replied. But equal partners don't let their mothers poison their marriages with accusations of abuse. Equal partners don't threaten divorce to win arguments about spending. And equal partners don't consult attorneys behind each other's backs while pretending to work on their relationship. What happened next would determine whether 8 years of marriage could be saved or whether we'd become another divorce statistic with a particularly complicated property settlement. Sarah asked if I'd be willing to meet with her and Patricia to discuss options for moving forward. I agreed, but with conditions. Helen needed to find other living arrangements immediately. Sarah needed to acknowledge that our financial problems were communication problems rather than abuse problems, and we needed to start marriage counseling with someone who specialized in financial conflict between couples. The meeting took place Tuesday morning in Patricia's office, a sterile conference room with generic landscape prints and the kind of furniture designed to look expensive without actually being expensive. Sarah looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed and her normally perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Patricia had clearly spent the weekend researching real estate law and looked distinctly uncomfortable with the situation her client had created. Mr. Hartley, Patricia began, my client would like to explore the possibility of reinstating your joint ownership of the marital property. I explained that reinstating joint ownership would require Sarah to qualify for the mortgage on her own first, then add me back as a co-borrower through a refinancing process. Given her income and credit score, she wouldn't qualify for a $320,000 mortgage independently, which meant the bank would require my financial participation to complete any modification. Sarah looked stricken. But that means I can't actually be independent, even if I wanted to be. No, I said. It means you can't have independence and security simultaneously. Those are competing values, not complementary ones. Real independence means real responsibility. The conversation that followed was the most honest we'd had in months. Sarah admitted that she'd never actually wanted to manage our finances independently. She'd wanted to feel respected and consulted about financial decisions. I acknowledged that I'd taken over our financial management so completely that she'd felt excluded from decisions about her own life. We'd both confused convenience with partnership and had never learned how to be financial equals in a relationship where one person earned significantly more than the other. The resolution we reached wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was practical and legally binding. I agreed to be added back to the mortgage, but only after we'd completed 6 months of marriage counseling and established new financial agreements that gave Sarah real decision-making authority over our budget and investments. She agreed to take a financial planning course so she could participate meaningfully in our financial decisions rather than delegating them to me and resenting me for managing them. Helen moved out the following week, and Sarah apologized for letting her mother's issues with her own marriage poison our relationship. I apologized for creating a financial dynamic that made Sarah feel dependent and excluded, even though that had never been my intention. 6 months later, we were still married, still seeing our counselor every other week, and still learning how to be partners instead of a manager and a dependent. Sarah had discovered that she actually enjoyed financial planning once she understood it, and I'd learned that being helpful isn't the same as being controlling. The difference is whether the person you're helping has real agency in the relationship. The experience taught me something essential about the difference between legal rights and emotional truths. I could execute a property transfer perfectly and still completely misunderstand what my wife needed from our marriage. I can know everything about real estate law and nothing about how ownership actually feels when you're the one being owned, financially speaking. Looking back now, I realized that Sarah's demand for financial independence wasn't really about money. It was about respect. She needed to know that I saw her as capable of making important decisions about our life together, not just the person who picked up the dry cleaning and managed our social calendar. And my response to her demands wasn't really about legal technicalities. It was about forcing her to confront the gap between what she said she wanted and what she actually needed. The mortgage crisis that almost ended our marriage became the thing that saved it, because it forced us both to be honest about what we brought to our partnership and what we needed from each other. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to tear it down completely and rebuild it from scratch, with both people participating in the construction this time. We still live in the same house in Bethesda, but now we both understand exactly what it costs and exactly what we're each contributing to maintain it. Sarah handles our day-to-day budgeting and has become surprisingly good at finding ways to optimize our expenses. I manage our long-term investments and retirement planning, but every major decision requires both our signatures, literally and figuratively. The Christmas that was supposed to be off became the Christmas when we learned how to be married to each other instead of married to the idea of each other. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone you love is the freedom to disappoint you and the security to know you'll both survive the disappointment. If there's anything I'd want other couples to understand from our experience, it's this. Financial conflicts in marriage are never actually about money. They're about power, respect, security, and whether you trust your partner to have your best interests at heart, even when they're making decisions you don't understand. You can't solve those problems with better budgeting apps or joint accounts or separate accounts or any other logistical solution. You can only solve them by learning how to talk to each other about what you're really afraid of and what you really need to feel safe and valued in your relationship. The signature that almost destroyed my marriage became the signature that saved it, because sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything to discover what you actually have.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.